thanks a lot, Sharat, for the great overview and introduction. What I will try to do is just to take some of the concept and some of the questions that Sharat mentioned. Sharat mentioned, I've been in Kenya. This is a preliminary round of research, so please bear with me. And reflecting in particular on some concept like the concept of hybridity that Sharat mentioned before. I remember at the beginning of our conversation, we weren't sure, we were sort of fascinated by the power of hybridity to look at certain phenomena, but also somehow skeptical. It's just one of these bouts where it starts to circulate into media circle, into the development circle, and so forth. And we sort of settled on its ability to capture something significant that is happening, at least in certain contexts in Africa. And I think Kenya, as a context, at large, helps making this point clearly. Some of you probably already know of M-Pesa. M-Pesa is the mobile money transfer system. Is the most successful in Africa, probably. Everybody who has a mobile phone in Kenya, almost everybody, has access to the system. Ushahidi, also extremely popular. It was his crisis response system that was developed in 2007 after the violence that erupted after the very contested election in Kenya. It was used to collect information through SMS and email to locate where this violence was happening. These are a good example of innovation which are hybrid. It's not something that will transfer from a context to another one, but emerge from the very unique needs and norms and networks of power characterized in Kenya and the opportunity offered by technology. And another concept of hybridity that's is also extremely interesting, to me is even more interesting, is the ability of these new tools to interact with existing tools. And sort of the communicative richness that characterizes even places in Africa, even if a lot of people think of the African communicative space kind of a blank slate, something that things do not happen. Actually, there is an extreme richness both in terms of old media and in terms of new media. And I put these two different sets of data there because it helps sort of also understanding a transformation that has been going on in the past few years. When I started being involved in the ICTs co-development fight research, the main term, the most popular term, was digital divide. And it was the divide between the information rich and the information poor. And what was making people rich or poor was their access to computer connected to the internet. As you can see here, the internet over the years, despite its growth, it's not doing extremely well. But in the meantime, as was already mentioned, the growth in terms of mobile phones, but the liberalization of the highways has created a context where it becomes even more important to look at translation rather than access. If something is happening on the internet, how can these be translated into different platforms, especially if the scope, the final scope of the research is to bring the poor on board, to bring those who are not do not have access to the latest technology. And a good example, again, and then I will go more into the research, is of the importance of translation is the Open Data Initiative. Kenya is the only country in Africa that participates to this global initiative, and it does it by putting information, sensible information from about how the government spends money in education, in health, and so forth, easily accessible on the website. And this has created, it's interesting to look at the rhetoric that has surrounded this very laudable initiative, saying, well, now citizen can check on the government, finally, citizen can have a voice. But which kind of citizen, despite the usability of this website, can really go on the internet, start digging into the data? And so this is one example of why translation is more important than just having things there available. But again, we don't want to be fetishists. Before it was all about the internet, now it's all about the mobile phone, and we really would like, and this is what our research does, to look both at what is new, how new interact with not so new anymore, but also what interact with existing practices. And that's why we decided at the beginning of the project to go for that. So to use these radio stations as a kind of vintage point where to look at all the different flows of information. So not just capturing SMS and mobile phones, even if this is the focus of the research, but all sorts of ways through which information reaches the radio station, is interpreted by a radio station, and then whether or not it falls back into the community. And as I will illustrate, there are all sorts of ways people still walk into a radio station to make sure that they can speak with someone so that their voice is heard or their case is brought to attention. So we don't have just to look at what happens in the mediated space. There's a lot of other spaces, especially small local radio stations, still matter a lot. And Charlotte already mentioned the different questions. One thing, and why we ask this particular question, and so I won't go back to it. One thing that I want to stress is concerned the fourth question, and because we are also often looking at the idea, as it was already mentioned, of citizenship and the media's this ability of individuals to use these new tools, these new media to hold an accountable government, accountable, to mobilize, to coordinate, and this can be the case in some occasions. Within the Arab Spring, this is how the way in which the media have been used. But if we look at the everyday life, if we look at, it's more a process of negotiation where existing powers has the ability, as I will try to show with some example, to sort of intersects into these spaces. So some spaces are built as democratic. If you look at the interaction between radio station and mobile phones, everybody can call. There is, during my ethnography, I never saw people trying to direct the presenters to answer to some phone calls and not to others. But there are many other ways through which power can occupy these spaces. They're democratic in theory, but they are not occupied democratically. So to go to the meat and add some color and to the presentation and to the findings. These are clearly two studios of two radio stations where I conducted most of my fieldwork. It was this summer for a couple of months between July and September. This is the studio of Pamoja FM. Pamoja means together in Kiswahili, and it was started in 2007 with the idea of bringing together the different ethnic groups that characterize the complex ethnic landscape of the Kibera slum. The slum of Kibera is the biggest in Nairobi. And the second one is Radio Namlongwe, which means Lake Victoria in Luo, and is in Kisumu. Luo is the language that is spoken in the Nyanza province. And interestingly, it was started not as a community radio station, but just by a politician as a platform for the campaign that was going to start soon after, again in 2007. But what is interesting is even if this was a politically biased space, some of the mechanisms that allowed citizens to hold those in power accountable also happened in biased space. And a lot of media studies, we sort of shy away when we see that, oh, this is the media are captured by politics. But I think it's very interesting to see also in this space that are skewed space, what are the dynamics that characterize the relationship between the citizen supporting certain politicians, but also contesting them, also because they belong to a similar ethnic and political space. And I will try to articulate that better. Just a couple of words on the kind of methodology that we used. As I said, participant observation, spending a lot of time, as much as possible, in the radio station with the journalists during their radio shows. We were looking in particular at governments. So we selected in the end, after having browsed a number of programs that these radios had, the morning show, which was the most interactive, the one where usually the papers are read, and all that, and also trying to follow some of the journalists outside of the space and see what they do with this information they collect. Later on, when we started becoming familiar with these spaces, and since we were interested in the innovation allowed by mobile phones and radio station, we selected the most active users. We selected them because they were sending a lot of SMS, we selected them because they were calling a lot, and we decided to call them back or to meet with them when possible. So we're trying to get an understanding of why they call the radio, what is the reason that encourages them to do so. And as a final point, as the third important actors, we try to reach out to existing actors involved in governance processes. So in the case of Kenya, it was chiefs, assistant chiefs, the district officer, and other people involved, trying to get a sense again of how do they interpret this kind of interaction. Do they see it as an opportunity for them to do their work? Is it useful information, or is it a trap? And some interesting results came out from that. Moving to the answer that I will try to give to these questions. I will skip the responses of the journalists probably because they were quite unsurprising. Journalists were saying, yes, the mobile phone has really changed the way in which we do our job and has allowed us really to know our audiences better. More interesting, I think, are the responses from the active users. And because what we started realizing by doing our ethnography in the radio station, I didn't mention that I was with a research assistant, the Kenyan research assistant, while I was carrying out my fieldwork, was that some people are becoming characters in the shows. People call very frequently, they sort of become self-appointed experts, and the radio is really offering the opportunity for new figures to emerge. And here there are a couple of quotes. I will just read the second one for you because I think is the most interesting. And this was in Kisumu in the Nyanza province. And now, for example, my presence at funerals is felt. When I arrive, I see that people acknowledge my presence. But also in general, people can come to me and ask me to intervene for something they care about, and this is because of the radio. If you're not familiar with Kenya, funerals are not just a space for grief, but are also a space for politics. It is for a funeral of an important person that an MP might go back to country and can be approached. So this also becomes, for other individuals, a space where they can sort of pass their political way. And this is quite illustrative of this phenomenon. But even more interesting, in both cases and at large in our research, was to look at how both informants, but in general, refer to a space outside of the radio as the space where their political weight matter. So you might become an important actor because of the radio, but then the space of politics is a space that is non-mediated. In the case of Kenya, for example, especially in the rural areas, it's still the baraza or the mabarasa, the space where the chief traditionally meet with the community where these decisions are made. And so it's important, becomes important again, following pieces of information, trying to get a sense of whether or not the debate that goes on in the radio is then picked up in these other spaces where the CG is held. And next week we'll have our speaker did research actually on Mabarasa, and it will go more into that, and still the relevance, how these spaces are eroded at some time, but they're still relevant, especially in the rural areas. And finally, this is the most interesting, and I won't spend a lot of time because Florence has a number of very good examples on that. It's not just the opportunities, but also the challenges of these new spaces. In Kenya, but also in places like Ghana or Uganda, as Florence will illustrate, there is an increasing phenomenon of what some people start calling serial callers. There are people who call radio station as a profession, and often they are paid by political actors in order to skew the debate in a certain direction or another. For me, Florence has started this in depth, and for me it was something of a new discovery, and I had a kind of a black and white idea at the beginning, and I was really grateful for the discussion we had in Charlotte, Florence, and Vidal, as we say, oh, on the one hand there is the true participant, the one, the funeral guard that used the radio to give the voice to the community, and then on the other hand there is the serial caller, the bad person, it's much more complicated than that. It's more of a continuum where people who sort of gain visibility then can be co-opted by a political party, and this can become part of a political career, and then can end up. But it's really important for us not to get shy when we see that a democratic space can use it ways that are not actually that democratic. And trying to move to the second question, the instrumental question. At this stage of the project, it was difficult to provide an answer to this particular question. A lot of people are saying, well, the radio and the mobile phones are transforming everything, it's giving a lot of power to the people. This course is about the ability to be trained, to be see it as a space where to become political actors. And in this sense, is interesting. I think I found interesting comparison with the Arab Spring again. Some of the papers that are emerging, trying to provide an answer of not just what happened and how it happened, but place these phenomena in historical perspective, are showing how these online spaces were sort of working as incubators for different actors to train as political actors, and to test whether or not they can coordinate their ability of an ability that then later on showed how its importance. So one question that we're asking is, are these spaces becoming working as incubators as well? Is the fact that people can learn better how to raise their voice, to articulate their claims, going to bring a change? So far, we had sort of a number of case studies, and I can go more into them in the question and answer. But the responses are not as exciting, as exciting as a kind of liberation technology agenda would like them to be. One of the case studies we are following is the case of water in Kibera. In the slum of Kibera, people pay water much more than in their rich neighborhood, because there are cartels that sort of collide together, and in order to keep the price high, to create artificial shortages and so forth. So we were mapping citizens' voice and calls and SMS on the issue of water, and what people tend to do is they call an element, they say, well, there's no water in my area, there is, or it's 2 shilling here, it's 5 shilling there. So at the end of some of the programs, what you have is a kind of a map of how much water costs in different spaces. But so it can help coordination, but it's much less likely that these cartels are attacked frontally. There is, everybody can talk about cartels, and the cartels are a problem. The radio is not used to target a particular cartel, a particular person. So again, this is an example of how even if the opportunity is there, the radio is there, and the mobile phone is there, existing power structure do have the ability of preventing certain usage that would be powerful from occurring. Then moving quickly and then leading to Florence, and to the third and fourth question. This question is the most difficult to answer. The constructive power of disposable interaction, of changing, on one level, how people perceive themselves as citizens, and we try to link with some of the research done again at IDS by Andrea Cornwall and the governance program and John Gaventa, where they looked at certain forms of participation as schools for citizenship. It's not in certain spaces, it's less likely the citizen perceive themselves as a bearer of right, as someone who is entitled of certain rights, and then ask the state to provide them. But it is more likely that because of the participation in a particular event, water shortage or something, people learn about their status as citizen, and so you can go more the other way around. And here is another quote. This is from a journalist at Pamoja FM in Kibera, which is looking at the kind of an optimistic power of the radio to reduce tension between among different ethnic groups. In Kibera, there are all ethnic groups, all Kenyan ethnic groups represented, which is saying, all sorts of people can call, so they get to know each other better. You say, oh, this Kalenjin guy is not that bad, this Luo guy is not such a good person, and so forth. We saw in 2007, and actually ethnicity can be used the other way around, can be used by political actors for much more self-centered interest. But still, I think asking these kind of constructive questions is very important. Whether radio, there's an important debate in Kenya, whether the vernacular radios are sort of essentializing this more, people becoming sort of suspicious that certain debates are going on, but not everybody can really understand what is being said about me or about the person next to me. Or are the media actually offering an opportunity, a platform, as it is mentioned in this case, to know each other better? And this leads me to the final question and my final example, which looks at how existing political actors perceive these forms of interaction. What I did was interviewing both in Kibera and in Kisumu the chiefs, the assistant chiefs, the district officer, and some other governance actors involved in the provision of water, for example. And all of them were sort of agreed and say, well, yeah, this is a great change, and we can do our job much better, we can collect information, and it has really helped us a lot. But there was a very interesting difference between the two cases, between Kibera and Kisumu, about what is the use that is made of this information by these former figures of governments. In the case of the district offices in Kibera, as you probably read on the radio, where they say, well, this is not enough. People can vent on the radio, but then they have to come here, they have to report, they have to interact with the bureaucratic state. And in the case of Kisumu, interviewing all these different actors, not just asking the chiefs, but also asking confirmation and then more context to journalists and to audiences. The chief was saying, well, no, for us it's enough. If we hear something on the radio, we follow up. And actually, it was quite interesting. I didn't want that, but when I went to Kisumu, it was sort of turned into a character on the program. So every morning it was in the morning show, and I had to do something. I wasn't always very successful, but anyways, when I walked into this office, I said, oh yes, I heard about you I heard you this morning, you were saying this and that. And I said, this is not just, I use the radio as the way to map what's happening in my community. And trying to get a sense of why this is the case. The answer was, because here in Kisumu, we are kind of the most united community, both politically and ethnically, so we know each other, and we can follow up. We feel entitled to follow up on some claims. While in the case of Kibera, as I mentioned here, you never know what it is behind the claim. Is this person is reported because he has done something wrong, or is reported because there is some grievance that goes deep into other kind of problems. So I will leave it here. I think this again is sort of a tentative, this is just to give you a sense of how the research, the initial part of the research is going. And Florence will give also another quite original look at how this research will go.
Yeah.